All right. What's up, guys? It's Connor, and guess what? Doing a review. That's right. Cue the YouTuber music. Bum 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 bum. Trying something new, y'all. Just stick with me. But Valdor is complete, and it was really good. I feel like this was a nice change of pace because a lot of the books in the Heresy so far have been super duper long, and that's not a bad thing considering you could pack a lot of details into the books. But this was a nice refresher. This was like under 200 pages, and you get a lot of pretty decent stuff out of it. And when I say stuff, I mean Custodes lore, Unification War lore, Thunder Warriors, and the beginning of the Astartes, the Space Marines, if you will. So, without a doubt, without a clue, without a snoo, let's get into Valdor. So we're going to start with part 1. Okay, so part 1 is sort of the overview, the just general story of Valdor, birth of the Imperium. So, start off with, we have the Emperor seemingly talking to Valdor, where the Emperor sort of trekked far and wide to find him at his birthplace. And they just have a very ominous conversation. He's like, this is probably going to be the only few times I can tell you everything and you can honestly respond to me without being biased. They have that chat. And then we kind of flip forward where we're introduced to one of the High Lords at this point called Candawire. And she's sort of she's in this new position and she's sort of maneuvering within this newly building Imperium because at this point, the Imperium is still new. The Unification War is essentially 99.9% over. The Emperor's really just kind of cleaning up Terra at this point. The last few remaining resistances and warring, warlords left. So it's safe to say he's accomplished what he wanted to accomplish on Terra, at least. And we get some bits and pieces of the newly forming Imperium and how their governmental system's working, how, the Emperor's sort of in control of everything, and he portrays this image that it's really him who's made everything in the Imperium, but then he also kind of tries to steer that image away a little bit by appointing all these important people under him, and he's kind of letting people know that it's a sort of added effort, if you will, that the brightest of humanity are working alongside him, but it was him who chose them. So obviously, we're starting with the dogma and the Imperial Creed really, really early, and it's interesting stuff, but as we keep going, we get a bunch of perspectives from Candawire, from Valdor, and she asks him what happened to the Thunder Warriors on Mount Arat. And of course, that leads to this very, interesting interview with them where he's essentially telling her just the bare minimum, how the Thunder Warriors were an ineffective use of basically warriors and they were unstable, and unfortunately they've just been retired, but they're not dead, and yada, yada, yada. And then we keep going forward and we see some other perspectives from, I think his name was Achilla. Forgive me, I may speak English, but my mastery over it is pretty abysmal. And essentially he's this old warrior who's a gun for hire, who's been around even before the Emperor, and he was fighting during Unification War. But as that's sort of over, we're getting his perspective of how war used to be fun, but the Emperor has made it so it's just so dogmatic and restricted. The Emperor operates on logic, of course, and that's how he fights his wars as well. Very mechanical, and it's taken the emotion out of war. And Achilles sort of sees his creations in person, i.e. the custodians, and how they demolish everybody in front of them, throwing, tanks with their hands, and it's brutal stuff, and he remarks on how frightening they are and how they've essentially destroyed what war used to mean, and it's an abomination and it's horrifying, and everyone who's human at this point is sort of getting their own perspectives on the budding Imperium, and they're just saying how horrific it is because it's under such a tyrannical leader, but yet his tyranny will provide humanity with the best possible future in his perspective and Malcador's perspective and Valdor's perspective. So obviously, we get a lot thrown at us in a very digestible way, though. It's very easy to see everyone's emotions on this new Imperium. And then we keep fast forwarding where Kandawire is sort of trying to stage a last-ditch, coup d'etat on this Imperium and stop the Emperor from essentially ruling Terra and subjecting everybody on Terra to his imperial truth, if you will. And this leads to Amanda Astardi, the woman who helped create the Thunder Warriors and helped usher in sort of the Space Marines, if you will. And it's kind of ironic because there's a quote in there that says he kept her name in the project when naming the Astardis. Quite ironic. The Emperor seems to enjoy the mild irony. But regardless of that, she's also a very interesting character. And we kind of get to see in these last moments of the story how the Emperor's plans are kind of going in motion. He's starting the Great Crusade. Kandawire starts over. Amanda Astardi is dead. Valdor has a face-off with Ushotan, the Primarch of the Thunder Warriors. And in this context, the Primarch isn't, what we're accustomed to, i.e. the Emperor's sons. More, Primarch is a title used to describe the generals and just best performers of the Thunder Warriors. And so, again, we just kind of see how we get some pre-unification war and allure, and we just kind of see the beginning of the Great Crusade, where the Emperor is sort of going to find the lost Primarchs, and he's basically employing the Space Marines, and Valdor says he doesn't really like them very much. It's an interesting story, and I really highly recommend you read it because I'm leaving stuff out on purpose so you can go and enjoy Valdor for what it is. So now that we've kind of gotten a really brief overview of the story, we're going to go into part 2. So part 2 is going to be basically the standout characters. So right off the bat, Ushotan. Ushotan is just a bro. And what I mean by that is when people think of the Thunder Warriors, a lot of the times they think of, obviously, what is the most prevalent thing that is shown with them in lore and in YouTube videos. Everyone likes to just state the obvious of the prototype, the blueprint to the Astartes. They're highly inefficient. They just are prone to madness and flesh disintegration and all that stuff. But people don't really mention they are human. They are just amped up, super gene-enhanced humans, but they have personality. There's no psycho indoctrination. None of that to the extent of, let's say, the custodians, who are essentially emotionless machines whose only concerns are the protection of the Emperor and Terra, and the Space Marines, who hypno-indoctrination to the max, and they have their own culture from their various Legion homeworlds and Brotherhood and all this aspects. The Thunder Warriors are basically gen-crafted humans pumped up to the max, and they have personality, they have thoughts and dreams and goals, and they have they're true individuals. Ushotan is no exception. Ushotan, being the Primarch of the Thunder Warriors in this instance in the book, has this amazing, kind of conversation with Valdor, where before Mount Arat, there's a kind of situation where they're on Malin Sen, and it's a campaign where the Thunder Warriors have just dipped into madness, blood-induced, rage. Almost coordinate in nature, but not exactly. It's just how their gene structure is, and unfortunately, the vulnerabilities of said gene structure lead to this berserker-like madness. And he just says, to Malcador at the end after this battle, because it was against the Witch King, he says, I pity you, because you'll never enjoy this. And towards the end, when they have their epic, face-off, they keep fighting, and he just keeps getting his ass beat. But he keeps talking to Valdor. He says, you don't really appreciate any of this. You don't enjoy this. You don't understand that the Emperor has taken everything away from you. What else can he take from you? And then as Valdor kind of does the killing blow with his spear, he just kind of looks at him and just whispers. He's like, he can't take anything anymore. He's, nothing at all. And it's a really intimate scene between the two, because Valdor is kind of depicted as this man who's the peak. He is exceptional beyond exception. He's a special character, even amongst Custodes, who are peak of humanity, even a step above the Space Marines, but a step below Primarchs. He alone, again, is the exception. He is the only one who bows to the Emperor. Not to Malcador, he bows only to his leader. And just to have what is seemingly, he gets kind of more expressive as the book goes on and shows these human-like moments. Even then, when he's talking to Ushotan in his final moments, he just kind of tries his best to emulate emotion. Even when they're having little retorts during the final battle, Ushotan remarks and says, "So these are your new warriors. I hate them. They are not very good at what they're doing." And then Valdor kind of is having an inner monologue where he says, "It was funny, I wish I could retort the way he can." So he just does his best and says, "I'm not very fond of them either." And it's really funny, and Ushotan just really stood out to me. And I kind of dipped into Valdor as well. But Valdor, as I said, was getting more expressive and more human in the book. Now, obviously, in current 40K, we have no clue what Valdor's up to. Some say he's the King in Yellow, as we get, from the Eisenhorn series, and going forth in the future series after Eisenhorn is dead. I don't really want to focus on that because I feel like it'll take away from what I only know from this book. And it's obvious he's the exception to the rule in every case. He is constantly remarked as being special and important, and there's a reason why the Emperor used so many resources to acquire Valdor in his birth. And we still don't know the reason as to why Valdor is so special and why the Captain General is so important amongst his brothers. We have no clue. But it's exceptional nonetheless because we get to see how he thinks, and he thinks like a machine. He has no personality except this sort of emulated one where he thinks this is how he should act. When he converses with Kendawire, when he converses with Ushotan, we kind of see him learn how to be more human in a way that he's forgotten. Because, of course, when you're going through the process of the custodial creation, you're stripped of your emotions and kind of refed everything. You're a machine for the Emperor. You are one of his companions, and yet you can only obey and only voice your opinion, sure, but you will obey. At the end of the day, you serve the Emperor above all, and he is your goal. And Valdor is no exception to this, but he's just so interesting nonetheless. His relationship with the Emperor is like a father and son, except it's a very absent father, and Valdor doesn't seem to mind this because he knows his role, and he knows that there will be a time where the Emperor won't be needed once he succeeds in the Great Crusade. When he talks with Malcador, I'm more akin to think of the relationship like kind of a close family member, like an uncle. They kind of share some retorts back and forth, and Malcador's just kind of having fun with him and smiling and getting interested in the fact that he's sort of developing a personality, if you will. So it's interesting. It's really cool and fun, and I dig it. Kendawire, High Lord. Not a lot to say about her. I liked her though. She's really cool. She's got a real personality. She doesn't take shit from people. She really was pressing on Valdor when interviewing him. And I like her conclusion of sort of starting again in her, in what it would be Africa, but it's African or something now, but not a lot to say. I just really enjoyed her. Malcador, from the little I got to see of him in this book, it's cool to see how he had a direct influence in picking the High Lords and sort of spreading the imperial lies of the Emperor's origins and just how big his spy network is. I really like to compare him to someone like Viserys from, Game of Thrones, the eunuch, really cool dude, just full of secrets upon secrets of the arcane and everything, so really awesome. And then there's Achilla, however his name is going to be pronounced, this old war dog. I really respect him because when it comes to 40K novels, I like Space Marines, I like Chaos, I love most of everything. But I like the human perspective in this world of monsters and gods, when you can see the people who have to fight and eventually try to kill these insane beings. It's an interesting perspective. And to see Achilla, we're just going to call him Achilla, the man Billa Achilla. But regardless, he's remarking on the past of old Earth, of Terra, and now we get to see how he fights against Custodes, and eventually he gets killed by the reintroduced First Legion. And he makes remarks about how the Space Marines are still new. Their skin is still chafing against their power armor and their sword, and they're just freshly off, hypno indoctrination. And they made a fractional of a fraction mistake, and he, a human, can notice the fraction of fraction mistake in that split second. And he laughs and he says, at least I taught you something, and then he dies. But the old War Dog perspective is something I'll never get bored of, and it's something I really, really enjoy. He's such a cool character, and he may not stand out to a lot of people who read this, but to me, he really stood out. It was interesting to get these pre-bits of Unity, lore, and learning about the, Thunder Warriors. It was awesome. There's a lot of individuals in this, and they're all just so expressive in their own way. And it's just awesome to see, because 40K as a whole can feel a little overwhelming, and when we're kind of jumping all the way back in time to Unification War sort of wrapping up, it's a lot more digestible, I think, for newer readers and even experienced readers, because it's not a lot of pages. It's under 200 pages, and when the lore's getting spit at you, it's presented in a way where you're learning just enough information to be interested, but there's still enough mystery in the things that you're learning to keep you hooked on whatever you're reading. So really, really good stuff. And I would say that concludes part 2 for the standout characters. Now let's go on to part 3. So part 3, final part, my thoughts, my feelings on Valdor. So coming off of all the heresy books I've read, so that would be Horus Rising, False Gods, Galaxy in Flames, Flight of the Eisenstein, Fulgrim, and this, I think it was Descent of the Angel. No, it's the one with the Dark Angels. I already forgot the name, and that's so crazy because I did a video on it. And then I'm reading Legion right now, but I'm just gonna be so straight up. It's kind of boring and it's kind of lame, but I can't really say that because I'm only a chapter in, but not a fan. But this, Valdor is a nice break because it doesn't feel like a heresy book. It just feels like I'm going back in time, and it's like almost a filler episode, if you will. Like I'm getting, bits and pieces of world building and lore that, doesn't exist anymore, because obviously we've advanced so far into the millennia, into the, 43rd, or 42nd. But regardless of whatever era we're in and how far 30K is gone now, it's just a nice break. And it's also nice to be introduced to these characters. I didn't know really anything about Valdor except from other YouTubers doing, 1 to 2 hour long videos on excerpts of him. But I've said it before, and I'll always say it. Excerpts are great, and getting your info from YouTubers and, Reddit, it's good because it sort of acts as an introduction to what you find interesting. But if you're only getting your info from YouTubers and excerpts, you're sort of missing out on what makes these excerpts have the emotional impact that they do in both the stories and to you as a reader. So I really always highly encourage you to just try to get a book, try to get a novel, get anything that interests you, because these excerpts are only a fraction of what makes the character and the situations they're in entertaining. And with Valdor, it was no exception. Reading Valdor and then comparing it from the excerpts I've heard from other YouTubers, it was like night and day. So obviously I appreciate reading the excerpts, reading the excerpts and hearing them, but reading this and seeing a glimpse of who Valdor is and the events that were taking place in this book were awesome. Because I've always been interested in Thunder Warriors and the Unification Wars, because we get so little. We get bits and pieces, which is my preferred way of getting the lore, as opposed to sort of kind of ruining the mystery, if you will. But that being said, this was, I would say, this was like a 9 out of 10. I really enjoyed it because it wasn't so over the top that it gets insane, but it wasn't so, the opposite either. It was a healthy balance, and my boy Chris Wright is a really good author. I really dig his books. So, this is always going to be a really good book. So I would really recommend this to anybody. Regardless if you're reading the Heresy or not, this is still a good 40K novel. You don't necessarily... There was a part of me that doesn't want to read anything out of order, so obviously I know, like, timeline-wise, this happens before a lot of everything in the Heresy. But I was reading in release order, of course, so I can get references and things of that nature, but I got over that. But it's a good book, ladies and gentlemen. This is a phenomenal book. It's, you know, it really is something I'd recommend. It's just a really good intro into Custodes lore, and it's also a really good perspective of humanity as a whole, while the Emperor is still this human figure, if you will. He's not mythologized yet by countless worlds under imperial control. He's just a man conquering the world he was raised on. So highly, highly recommend it, ladies and gentlemen. And that was Valdor. So we're still reading Gaunt's Ghost, so stay tuned for that. And I have a quick favor to ask you, ladies and gentlemen. I hate to be like other YouTubers, but unfortunately, I'm no different. I like attention just like they all do. So, if you want to click that bell thing, I think, if I have one, feel free to click it. You obviously don't really have to. This is a hobby, but I enjoy sharing my stuff with other people. So if you like the video, if you want to subscribe, go for it. I always appreciate it, and you guys rock. You know, I love the comments I get. I love talking to you guys about this stuff. So thank you. And Valdor is complete, and this is complete. So I am out of here.